Hey everyone and welcome back to the channel. So I'm doing an additional video today because there's some huge news come out from Blizzard about Hearthstone. They've actually announced some pretty big nerfs which are going to go live today, so they may even be live while you're watching this video. And only 2 weeks after the expansion of the Rastakhan's Rumble, which is really interesting timing. But there's going to be some really big changes. I don't remember ever being this many big changes to the game in recent memory anyway. There's going to be changes to Druid, changes to Kingsbane Rogue, changes to Odd Paladin, changes to Shudderwok, and in my opinion, all really good changes, I think. Unfortunately, if you do play one of those decks, it is going to be nerfed, but let's get into the details and have a look at what they've changed. Now let's start with probably the biggest change, and this is to the Druid class. Now a lot of people have been calling for nerfs to the Druid class for a long time because they have such a strong core set of cards that you can put in loads of different decks. You just put these same cards in every deck, just change a couple of cards, put Togwaggle in, maybe put Malagos in, and suddenly you've still got a strong deck. And what they're doing here though, Blizzard, they're not going after Spreading Plague, they're not going after Ultimate Infestation, but they're really targeting Druid's ability to ramp their mana crystals. Now, this is kind of the class identity to Druid, so it is a bit of a big change for the whole class. I think going forward, the class will have to be kind of different archetypes will have to be made because now they're only going to be able to ramp a lot slower. And when you take a look at the cards, Wild Growth is the first one to be affected. It used to cost 2 mana, but now it will cost 3 mana to gain an empty mana crystal. Now, it may seem like only a small change just by making a 1 mana change, but to a 2 mana card, increasing it by a 1 mana to 3, that is pretty huge. And it just delays their ability to ramp by a whole turn and then slows everything down. So it gives your opponent a better chance to kind of build their board up or set up their game plan because Druid isn't ramping as quickly. And another thing to say about Wild Growth is that not just the fact that it costs an extra mana crystal, but you can't play it on turn 2 now. So you'd have to play something else on turn 2 potentially. And if you play it on turn 3, it means you can't play something on turn 3 because you're playing Wild Growth now. And you'll notice probably when you're playing Druids, they often pass turn 1. Turn 2, if they don't have Wild Growth, they're just hero power. Now, they don't really have anything strong to play on 2. And then if they do play Wild Growth on 3, that's 3 turns when they haven't actually done anything. Of course, you get the effect from Wild Growth afterwards, but that's 3 turns where they may not have impacted the board at all, and it just gives your opponent such a huge advantage, especially if they're playing an aggressive deck such as Odd Rogue. And then when you combine it with the next card, we move on to Nourish, which now will cost 6 mana. It used to cost 5 mana. Now, I'm so surprised that Blizzard has decided to change both of these cards, but I'm actually quite pleased. I think it's a good thing for the game. So, again, it's just a 1 mana change, but like I said with Wild Growth, it just delays the whole process, the whole ability to ramp. Whereas before, you could play this on turn 5, then you ramp up to 7 mana crystals, and by the time your next turn comes around, you have 8 mana crystals to spend. Well, now you have to wait until turn 6, and then when you come back, you will have 9 mana crystals. So it kind of synergizes with some cards, like if you're playing a Master Oakheart deck, for example, sometimes it would be nice to do this on 6 because then the next turn you're on 9 mana. But let's be honest, it's a whole turn later. You haven't played your Wild Growth to a turn later, so everything's going to be so much harder for Druid. Now, I still think that individually both of these cards are actually still pretty good value for the mana cost. 3 mana to gain an extra mana crystal for the rest of the game up until 10 mana basically. And then Nourish 6 mana to either draw 3 cards or gain 2 mana crystals. They are still very strong cards, but I think both the nerfs combined really affects the Druid decks as we know them now. Ramping up into Ultimate Infestation is still a pretty decent way to win a game, but it just all happens 1 turn later, and it would be so much nicer for the rest of the decks in the game to have that extra time. So the extra time to build your game plan rather than just sitting there and watching Druid at 10 mana and just crushing you with an Ultimate Infestation, refilling the hand and just steamrolling the game from there. So I'm really happy to see these changes, and these changes I think on their own are really going to shake up the meta because Druid is just suddenly slower, and either they're going to have to look at slightly new archetypes, or I think the win rate will just come down. And Blizzard didn't just stop there, they actually also moved on to Paladin, and another huge change. This one is for Odd Paladin, one of the most prevalent decks in the game, and this pretty much kills it. I think you could still play an Odd Paladin deck, but one of their strongest cards, Level Up, is changing from 5 mana to 6 mana. So not only does it affect the deck, it means you just can't play this card anymore because it's an even cost card now at 6 mana. So you can play this in even Paladin if you want, but to be honest, there's not as many ways to summon your little 1/1 dudes, so you won't be using level up quite as efficiently as what you would in Odd Paladin. So this one I'm a little bit surprised about because I think the card itself, level up, is okay. I think it's just the overall power level of Odd Paladin was just too strong, and Blizzard probably wanted to look at a way to reduce that power level of that deck, and taking out a key card is one way to kill that deck. Odd Paladin will still have a lot of ways to buff their minions, but just taking out one of the really, really strong cornerstones of that deck just means I think that people will just stop playing it. Next up, we've got a huge nerf to Shudderwok, and not just a huge nerf, it actually kills the Shudderwok Shaman as we know it. No longer can you do the infinite combos because they've changed the Saronite chaingang, which is the key part of their combo, where they summon a copy of their Shudderwok and then bounce it back to their hand. Well, now that will no longer be able to happen because Saronite chaingang, instead of summoning a copy of this minion, the card now reads summon another Saronite chaingang. So that has some really big implications. Firstly, I think it just kills Shudderwok as we know it, which is fantastic. For me anyway, I really don't like playing against that deck. I don't think it's good for the game at all. So now the infinite combo with all of the things that they play with the life drinker, etc., that won't be possible anymore. But it also affects other decks, which I'm not quite as happy about, but still I think it might be a good thing. It also means that the second Saronite chaingang won't retain any of the buffs that you've put on it. So for example, if you played Soul Infusion in Zoo, well, it will only affect the first one and not the second one. The second one will still be a 2/3. The same goes for Even Paladin with Valinir. And also if you buff this with Keleseth, then it will only buff the first one, of course. So it's a really interesting change, and the more I think about it, it's probably fair to do it both ways, not just the Shudderwok nerf, but to nerf the buffing effects to it as well. And I think that's a good thing because Saronite chaingang is a really powerful card just on its own. If you play this as a 4 mana 2/3, which summons another 2/3, and they both have taunt, that is a strong card. But it kind of got out of control with a lot of things that you could do with chaingang. So this is, to me, is another welcome change. I'm glad they didn't change the mana cost of it or anything, because I think it's quite a good defensive tool that you can still play in a lot of decks if you need to slow your opponent down. So really, really interesting change, and I for one am pretty happy we won't be seeing too many Shudderwoks anymore. And finally, probably the most surprising change for me, but another huge change, is Leeching Poison. Now, instead of costing 2 mana and give your weapon lifesteal, it now costs 1 mana and gives your weapon lifesteal this turn. So this really, really impacts Kingsbane Rogue and probably kills it, to be honest. Not even probably, I think it just outright kills it, because Kingsbane Rogue is so powerful because you can constantly keep equipping your Kingsbane, and if it's got lifesteal and it's got a huge amount of attack, you can kill any minion in the game and take no damage to your face because you just gain it back. Your opponent can't kill you because you're just lifestealing every game, and it just feels so oppressive. But now you can put 2 copies of this in your deck and you can get lifesteal for 1 turn. You could still strategically use it at certain times when your weapon's massive and you're trying to gain lots of health back that way, but honestly I don't think it will be strong enough. I think this will actually kill Kingsbane Rogue, which is really interesting because Kingsbane's going to be rotating out in April after the next expansion. So it's interesting that they've made a lot of these changes now, but in my opinion, this is another good one. Kingsbane, in theory, was quite a cool deck. I think it was really cool when it first came out and trying to figure out how best to make the deck. But once people found out the best kind of cards to go into that deck, it just became really oppressive, and it sometimes felt like one of those decks where you're trying to play against it and really all you're doing is watching somebody else play Hearthstone, and they're just constantly killing you with their Kingsbane, sapping your minions, vanishing your minions, and you can't really do anything. So this is another welcome change for me. So that's it for all of the changes, and seriously, this is really going to change the game, and I'm really, really happy about it. Wild Growth and Nourish will be a bit difficult to take for Druid players initially, but to be honest, if they stayed at the mana cost they are, it's just going to be in the game forever. And some of these classic cards, that never rotate out. They just kind of make the cornerstone of a deck, so it just feels repetitive to keep playing against them. And when you're trying to build a druid deck, you think, oh, this would be quite fun, but then you're like, well, I'll just do this because I've got wild growth and nourish. Well, if they kind of move away from the game, it opens up new possibilities, and it just freshens up the game, both playing against druid and playing as druid. So that's a really good one. And they've also seemed to have gone after the other oppressive decks, such as Shudderwok, Kingsbane, and Odd Paladin. So it's really, really interesting times. What I'm a little bit concerned about is how the game will change, because it's very easy as a player to say, oh, thank God that all of these changes are happening. This is fantastic. But remember, when you make changes, they will be filled with other cards. So what other cards will fill the gap? What will people start playing? And actually, when you look at it, Warlock hasn't had any changes here. Nothing really affects Warlock, so a lot of the control Warlock decks will be quite strong. Maybe we'll see more Q block, which, you know, we've seen a lot of that. It will rotate out in April, but still. And actually, what I'm a little bit worried about is Hunter, because Hunter in his first couple of weeks of this expansion with Zul'jin, I think has been very oppressive. Definitely a cool effect, and you know, it's a great deck to play because you can be completely lost and dead, have no cards in your hand, draw Zul'jin, and suddenly you've won. It feels pretty good when you play it, but I don't know. I think without those sort of nerfs and the fact that Odd Paladin might be going away, which was a pretty good way to play against Hunter, just to beat them down quickly. Maybe we'll see more Hunters and that deck will become oppressive. I don't know. But I think overall, I'm really, really happy with these changes. Lots of people were so surprised when they did the announcements, the previous nerf announcements, and they didn't actually change Druid. But now they've really, really gone for it. They really cut Druid's legs away, and a number of the other decks, which I'm pretty pleased about. So guys, what do you think? Let me know. Are you happy about the changes? Are you upset? I'm really hopeful for the future of the game, because this will help to, you know, the game will feel less stale. There'll be lots of new cool things happening. And don't forget, if you do have any of these cards, once the nerfs go live, you can actually dust them for their full value. Unfortunately, this won't impact Kingsbane, so for example, or Shudderwok. So for example, if you have those cards, it only relates to the cards that got nerfed, not the cards that kind of go into that deck. So that is unfortunate for people who have crafted those decks recently. That's really unfortunate. But anyway, guys, exciting times. I really hope you liked the video, and I'll see you in the next one.